My name is Cassian, and for 8 years, I gave everything to a woman who barely noticed I was there. At first, our love felt unshakable. I worked late nights, planned special anniversaries, put her first in every decision. Because that's what you do for someone you love, right? But slowly, something changed. She stopped caring. She started treating me like an afterthought, barely looking up when I walked into the room, forgetting our anniversary, acting as if my efforts were expected, not appreciated. And when I finally confronted her, she laughed, told me I was too sensitive, told me I was lucky to have her, told me she didn't owe me anything. That night, something inside me shifted. For years, I had been fighting to keep us together. But what happens when the person you love stops fighting for you? How much are you willing to sacrifice before you realize you're the only one trying? And when I finally stopped, when I pulled away, when I chose myself for the first time in years, she was the one who panicked. But by then, it was too late. Want to know what happened next? Stay with me, because this story is just getting started. I still remember the beginning, the way Isolde's laughter used to fill a room, how effortlessly we fell into each other's rhythms. We were young, hopeful, and wildly in love, convinced that we would always be enough for each other. I worked hard, not just for myself, but for us, for the future we dreamed about. Every late night, every sacrifice, every decision, I made them with her in mind. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. At first, it was small things. She stopped reaching for my hand when we walked together. Conversations that once lasted for hours were replaced with short, distracted replies. She used to leave me notes, simple things like, "Have a great day, love you." Those disappeared too. I told myself it was just stress from work, that she was busy, that things would go back to normal. One evening, I stopped on my way home to pick up her favorite coffee. A small gesture, something I knew she'd appreciate, or at least something she used to appreciate. When I walked in, she was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I handed her the cup, waiting for the familiar warmth in her eyes. Instead, she barely looked up. "You didn't have to do that, Cassian. I could have picked it up myself." I hesitated, forcing a smile. "I wanted to surprise you." "Thanks," she said absently, taking a sip before returning her focus to her phone. "But I'm in the middle of something right now." I stood there for a moment, waiting for her to say something else. Maybe "How was your day?" or "I missed you." But nothing came. I sat down across from her, pretending to watch TV, but all I could focus on was the growing space between us. The realization settled in slowly. I was becoming an afterthought. Our anniversary was always a day we celebrated, until it wasn't. That morning, I woke up early and left a small note on her nightstand, something simple. "Happy anniversary, love. Can't wait for tonight." I had planned everything, a reservation at her favorite restaurant, flowers, even a special bottle of wine. I left work early, excited to see her reaction. She wasn't home when I arrived, so I set the table, arranging the flowers in the center. I checked my phone, no messages. An hour passed, then another. Finally, she walked in, tossing her keys on the counter. "Hey," she said casually, heading straight for the fridge. I waited, expecting her to notice the effort, the flowers, the table. But she didn't. I cleared my throat. "So, any idea what today is?" She blinked, genuinely confused. Wednesday?" I felt the air leave my lungs. "It's our anniversary, Isolde." Her expression shifted, realization, then guilt, then indifference. "Oh, was that today?" She grabbed a bottle of water, twisting the cap. "I completely forgot. I have a work dinner tonight. Rain check?" Something inside me cracked. I nodded slowly, watching her as she walked past me, like it was just another day. When she left, I sat at the candlelit table alone, staring at the untouched plate across from me. She used to be excited about our anniversary. Now, it was just another day. I wasn't even worth remembering. I decided to test something. For the next few days, I stopped initiating conversations. No more, "How was your day?" No more texts just to check in. I wanted to see if she would notice. She didn't. At first, I told myself she was just busy, that maybe she assumed I was fine. But the truth was she didn't even register the difference. When she finally did, it wasn't concern. It was mild curiosity. "You've been quiet lately. Is something wrong?" I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to ask her why she had stopped seeing me, why she no longer looked at me the way she used to. Instead, I just shrugged. Nothing. That was the moment I realized I was the only one holding on to this marriage. One night, I walked into the room and saw her laughing at her phone, fingers flying across the screen. It had been months since I'd seen her look that happy. Not with me, at least. I could have asked. I could have demanded to know what was so funny, who she was talking to. Instead, I just stood there for a moment, absorbing the weight of my own irrelevance. Then, without a word, I turned and walked out. For the first time, I wasn't just hurt. I was done. I sat in my car outside our home, staring at the dashboard. The engine was off, the world outside was quiet, but inside me, everything was loud. I had never felt so alone in my own marriage. Would she even notice if I left? That thought lingered in my mind longer than I expected. It wasn't a passing frustration, not some dramatic impulse. It was a genuine question, a realization. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. I didn't leave that night, but something inside me had shifted, and that was the beginning of the end. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Isolde moving around the kitchen, the clinking of a spoon against a coffee mug, the low hum of the fridge opening and closing. It was routine, nothing unusual, but for the first time, I didn't feel the need to get up and greet her. I lay in bed for a few minutes longer, staring at the ceiling, letting the silence stretch. No good morning, no forced attempts at connection. When I finally walked into the kitchen, she barely looked up from her phone. "Morning," she muttered, stirring her coffee. I grabbed a cup from the cupboard and poured myself some, without responding. That small break in our routine, it was the first of many. I stopped texting her first. I used to send her messages throughout the day, checking in, asking about work, sending small reminders that I was thinking about her. I didn't realize how much I had been doing to hold our conversations together until I stopped. The silence stretched. At first, she didn't notice, or if she did, she didn't say anything. But after a few days, there was a shift. One evening, as I was scrolling through my phone on the couch, she sat down next to me, a little too casually. "You've been distant lately," she said, her tone light, but there was something underneath it, something uncertain. "Something on your mind?" I kept my gaze on the screen for a moment before shrugging. "Not really." She studied me, waiting for more. When I didn't offer anything else, she frowned slightly but didn't press. For the first time, I had the upper hand. I started spending more time outside the house, late nights at the office, extra hours at the gym, grabbing drinks with Ethan, anything that kept me away from the stifling weight of our apartment. It wasn't an affair, it wasn't some grand rebellion, it was just space. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Isolde, however, didn't like it. At first, she acted like she didn't care, but then came the passive-aggressive remarks. "You're home late again. You never used to stay out this much. You could have at least told me." I didn't take the bait. One night, I walked in to find her setting the table for dinner. She looked up at me expectantly. "I made pasta." I glanced at the food, then at my watch. I had grabbed something on the way home, not expecting her to cook. "I already ate." Her expression flickered, just for a second. "You didn't even ask if I wanted to eat together." I shrugged, setting my keys on the counter. "You didn't seem hungry." For the first time in a long time, she had no response. She started trying in small ways. A random coffee left on the counter for me in the morning. A casual mention of an old inside joke. A text during the day. "Hope your day's going well. What time will you be home?" I saw the messages. I didn't respond right away, because now I wanted her to feel what I had felt for years. The first real argument came when she finally broke. I was brushing my teeth when she leaned against the bathroom door frame, arms crossed. "You're acting weird." I spit out the toothpaste, wiped my mouth, and met her eyes in the mirror. "Am I?" She let out a short laugh, but it was forced. "Are you mad at me?" I turned to face her, the words forming before I could stop them. "I'm just done trying harder than you." Silence. She looked stunned, like she hadn't expected me to say it out loud, and for the first time, I saw something flicker behind her expression. Fear. The next morning, she was different. She tried to make small talk over breakfast, asked if I needed anything before I left for work. For years, I had begged for that attention. Now, I barely acknowledged it. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt her shift beside me. She wasn't sleeping. She was staring at me in the dark, probably wondering what had changed. And for the first time, I let her wonder. Even with my back turned to her, I could sense the tension in the air. The way her breathing wasn't steady, how she shifted every so often, the subtle weight of her gaze on me. She was awake, lost in thought, restless, and I knew why. She was finally afraid. For years I had been the one who lay awake, wondering what had changed, wondering if I wasn't enough, if I had done something wrong, if I could somehow fix what was breaking between us. Now, the roles had reversed. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel guilty. I felt nothing. I closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion take me under. She wasn't ready to let go, but neither was I. The next morning, I woke up before she did. I slipped out of bed quietly, moving through the house like a ghost. The usual routine: coffee, quick shower, getting dressed for work. I expected her to stay in bed, the way she usually did. Instead, she appeared in the kitchen, hair messy, wearing one of my old shirts. It was the first time in a while she'd been up early when she didn't have to be. I felt her watching me as I poured my coffee. "You're leaving early," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Got work," I said simply. She hesitated, then took a step closer. "Do you want me to make you breakfast?" It was such a strange question. For years, she had never been the type to wake up early and cook for me. I had never minded. I wasn't someone who needed grand gestures. But now, standing in the quiet kitchen with her watching me expectantly, I realized what was happening. She was trying. Too little, too late. I took a sip of my coffee, shook my head. "I'll grab something on the way." She nodded, looking down at the floor. It was the first time she had ever been the one trying to hold on to me. And for the first time, I didn't reach back. She started canceling plans more often. At first, I thought nothing of it. She had always been social, always had somewhere to be, someone to see. But suddenly, she was home more. One evening I walked in expecting an empty house, but she was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. I frowned. "Thought you had dinner with Victoria tonight." She shrugged. "Didn't feel like going." That was new. I didn't ask why. I just sat down, turned on the TV, and let the silence settle. I could feel her shifting beside me, waiting for something. Maybe for me to ask, maybe for me to care. I didn't. The next night, she asked if I wanted to go out for dinner. It was so casual, so forced, like she was trying to make it seem normal. "What for?" I asked. She let out a small, nervous laugh. "Since when do I need a reason to take my husband out?" I studied her for a second. A few months ago, I would have jumped at the offer. I would have been thrilled that she wanted to spend time with me. But now I didn't trust her intentions. I shrugged and walked past her. "I'm not hungry." She didn't stop me. She was unraveling. I saw it in the way she fidgeted more, how she checked her phone constantly, waiting for something that never came. Then she started asking Victoria for advice. One night, I overheard her on the phone. "He's different," she whispered. "It's like he doesn't care anymore." I didn't stop to listen to the rest. I already knew what Victoria would say. Men don't just stop trying unless they have something else going on. I could already hear it, the paranoia, the assumptions. That night, I caught her going through my phone. I walked into the bedroom after my shower and found her sitting on the edge of the bed, holding my phone in her hands. She looked up, wide-eyed. I stared at her. "What are you doing?" "Nothing." She set the phone down quickly. I didn't say a word. I just watched her for a long second, then turned and left the room. I didn't care enough to argue, and I think that scared her more than anything. She didn't sleep that night. I could tell by the way she kept moving, adjusting the blanket, shifting closer and then further away. She was restless, lost in thought. I wasn't. I slept soundly, peacefully, because for the first time, the weight was no longer mine to carry. I woke up feeling lighter. The weight I had carried for years, the endless effort, the exhaustion of trying to hold everything together, was gone. Isolde, on the other hand, wasn't sleeping well. She tossed and turned beside me, shifting under the blankets, her breath uneven. Every so often she'd glance my way, as if waiting for me to say something, to reach out. I didn't. I got up, got ready for work, and moved through my morning without a word. When I walked into the kitchen, she was already there, waiting. "Morning," she said quickly, like she wanted to make sure she was the first to speak. I poured my coffee, took a sip. "Morning," she hesitated. "You have a busy day today?" "Yeah." A pause. I could feel her watching me, expecting more, waiting for me to ask about her day like I always did. I didn't. Instead, I finished my coffee, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. For the first time, she was the one left standing in silence. That night, I came home late. I wasn't avoiding her, I just didn't feel the need to rush back anymore. Isolde was sitting on the couch, flipping through a book she wasn't actually reading. "Hey," she said as I walked past. "Dinner's in the kitchen." I glanced over. The table was set, a home-cooked meal waiting. It was a rare sight. She hadn't cooked for me in a long time. But it wasn't about the food. She was trying to fix something without acknowledging it was broken. I nodded. "Thanks." I didn't sit down, I didn't engage. I just walked to the bedroom, leaving the meal untouched. The next day she tried again. A text popped up in the middle of work. "Hope your day's going well." A few hours later, another one. "What time will you be home?" She never used to check in. She used to expect me to work late, to figure things out on my own. But now she was waiting for answers that I wasn't willing to give. I didn't respond right away. When I finally did, it was short, late. I could almost picture her frowning at the screen. By the end of the week, she couldn't take it anymore. I was sitting on the couch, mindlessly scrolling through my phone when she stood in front of me, arms crossed. "Are you mad at me?" I looked up, barely blinking. "No." "Then what is going on?" I set my phone down and exhaled slowly. "I'm just tired of being the only one who cares." Silence. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she had no immediate response, no quick defense. I could see the wheels turning in her head, the calculations, the attempt to figure out how to spin this back in her favor. And then she found it. "Oh, so now you're playing the victim?" I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "I never said that. But I also don't owe you an explanation anymore." That got to her. I could see it in the way her expression flickered, just for a second. I stood up, walked past her, and went to bed. For the first time, I was the one leaving her standing alone. The next few days, she changed tactics. She started bringing up old memories, little things we used to laugh about. "Remember that weekend in Santa Barbara? God, we were such a mess back then." She even tried to act normal around our friends, slipping into the role of the doting wife in public, laughing at my jokes, reaching for my hand. But I saw through it all. She didn't miss me, she missed controlling me. And that was the moment I knew. Whatever we had before, it was already gone. I had stopped playing along, but she hadn't stopped trying. Isolde had always been skilled at pretending she cared, pretending things were fine, pretending she hadn't noticed the way I had slowly withdrawn from her. But now, the cracks were starting to show. She wanted to pull me back in, and I was about to give her the opportunity. One last time. She invited me to a corporate event, something formal, a networking gathering filled with her colleagues and business connections. The kind of thing she used to go to alone because, as she once told me, you wouldn't enjoy it. I wasn't planning on going, but something about the way she asked made me reconsider. "You should come," she had said, her tone casual but calculated. "It would look bad if my husband wasn't there. Not, I want you there. Not I miss having you by my side. It would look bad." That was all I was to her now, a piece of the image she was trying to maintain. I agreed, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see, for myself, how far gone we really were. The venue was a high-end rooftop bar in the city, the kind of place where laughter was rehearsed, and conversations were just transactions in disguise. Isolde worked the room with ease, slipping between conversations like she belonged, flashing smiles, shaking hands. She barely looked at me, except to occasionally introduce me to someone as my husband Cassian. It was distant, almost robotic. I started noticing little things, the way she leaned in when talking to Michael, the same colleague she had mentioned in passing before, but never with much detail, the way she barely acknowledged me unless someone else was watching, the way Victoria smirked at me from across the room, like she knew something I didn't. I sipped my drink, keeping my expression unreadable, but inside, I was already preparing to walk away. It happened near the bar. I was in the middle of a polite but meaningless conversation when I heard her voice. I turned slightly, just enough to see her standing with a small group, Michael included. She was laughing. "Cassian," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. "Oh, he's harmless. A little too sensitive, to be honest." Someone chuckled. Michael added, "He must be really lucky to have you keeping him in check, huh?" Isolde smiled, taking a slow sip of her wine. "I mean, someone has to, right? They laughed, and I understood in that moment what I had refused to see for so long. She didn't just take me for granted. She enjoyed belittling me. I didn't make a scene. I didn't confront her in front of everyone. Didn't demand an apology. Didn't let the anger take control. I simply set my drink down, turned around, and walked out. The cold night air hit me as I reached the sidewalk. I took a deep breath, letting it settle inside me. Behind me, I heard her heels clicking against the pavement. "Cassian!" she called, frustration creeping into her voice. "What the hell?" I didn't stop walking. She caught up, grabbing my arm. "Are you seriously leaving?" I pulled my arm back, meeting her eyes. She scoffed. "You're overreacting." I stayed silent. She rolled her eyes. "It was just a joke, Cassian. Don't be so sensitive." I almost laughed. I let the silence stretch between us before finally speaking, my voice calm, steady. "I've spent years making excuses for you. Tonight, I finally ran out of them." Her face twisted into something unreadable. Shock, maybe, or realization. But I didn't wait for her response. I got in my car and drove away, ignoring the way she called after me, ignoring the way my phone started buzzing minutes later, ignoring the guilt that tried to claw its way back in. Because for the first time, I wasn't going home. I booked a hotel room, checked in without saying much to the front desk staff, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. The texts kept coming. "Come home. This is ridiculous. You're really going to be mad over something so stupid?" I put my phone on silent and tossed it onto the nightstand. The first time she mistreated me, I let it go. The 100th time, I finally walked away. I lay back, closing my eyes. And for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. When I finally walked through the front door the next evening, I expected a storm, a screaming match, some kind of emotional explosion. Instead, I was met with the sound of soft humming. The smell of dinner filled the house, something rich, savory, carefully made. Isolde stood by the stove, stirring a pot as if nothing had happened. She looked up when she heard me, smiling easily. "Hey, you're back." That was it. No anger, no accusations, no questions about where I had been. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to reset the board, acting like the night before hadn't happened, like my absence wasn't a statement, like I hadn't just walked out on our marriage. I didn't respond. I just nodded and walked past her, heading straight to the bedroom. Over the next few days, she kept up the act. She was suddenly affectionate again, offering me a drink after work, asking about my day, laughing at my jokes like she had been listening all along. She even bought me my favorite whiskey, setting it on the counter with a casual, "Thought you might want this." I barely acknowledged it. She suggested a weekend getaway. Just the two of us. Someplace quiet, someplace we could reconnect. I told her I had other plans. I watched the frustration build behind her carefully controlled expressions. Every time I remained indifferent, every time I didn't take the bait, she bit her tongue a little harder. She wasn't used to this. For years, she had dictated the emotional rhythm of our marriage, when we argued, when we made up, when things were normal again. Now, I had stopped playing my part, and she was starting to panic. The breaking point came one evening when she pushed just a little too hard. We were in the living room, sitting in complete silence. She had tried, once again, to fill the space with meaningless small talk, but I had barely responded. Finally, she sighed, rubbing her temples. "I don't get it, Cassian. Why are you acting like this?" I looked at her, waiting to see if she'd answer that for herself. When I didn't respond, she scoffed, shaking her head. "You know, Michael would never treat me like this." Silence. It was instant, the shift, the way the air in the room changed. I turned my head slowly, making sure I had heard her right. She met my eyes, not backing down. "Ah, so that's what this was now." I let out a quiet, humorless chuckle. "Huh?" Realizing she had miscalculated, she quickly backtracked. "I didn't mean it like that." I cut her off, my voice eerily calm. "Yeah, you did." She opened her mouth to say something else, but I was already standing. I grabbed my car keys without another word, walking straight out the door. I didn't come back that night. I sat alone in my car, parked on an empty street, staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. The man looking back at me wasn't the same fool who used to beg for her love. I drove with no real destination in mind, stopping only when exhaustion made it impossible to keep going. I checked into another hotel, not bothering to respond to the flood of messages from Isolde. She had crossed a line, and I wasn't interested in hearing whatever half-hearted excuse she had prepared. I didn't sleep much, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't lie awake thinking about how to fix things. I already knew the answer. There was nothing left to fix. The next day I went straight to work. No texts, no calls, nothing. I had a long day ahead, and the last thing I needed was another fight. But the moment I stepped into my office, I saw Ethan leaning against my desk, arms crossed, waiting for me. "Dude," he said, shaking his head, "your wife's been calling me." I exhaled, rubbing my temples. Of course she has. She asked if I knew where you were last night. And what did you tell her? The truth, he said, that I had no idea because, unlike her, I actually respect boundaries. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Figures. She never cared where I was before. Now, suddenly she does? Ethan studied me for a moment, then sighed. She's panicking, man. She knows she pushed you too far. I didn't answer. I just sat down at my desk and started going through emails. Ethan didn't push. He just patted my shoulder once before leaving me alone. When I finally went home that evening, Isolde was waiting. She was sitting on the couch, arms crossed, jaw tight. The moment I stepped inside, she stood up. "Where were you last night?" I barely glanced at her. "Out." "Out where?" I set my keys down, ignoring her. "Work?" she asked, voice sharp. "Or with someone else?" That made me pause. I turned to her slowly, raising an eyebrow. "You think I'm cheating?" She folded her arms tighter across her chest. "You disappear all night. You don't answer your phone. You're never home anymore. What else am I supposed to think?" I let out a short laugh, not because I was amused, but because the irony was suffocating. "You ignored me for years," I said, shaking my head. "And now you suddenly care where I am?" Her jaw clenched. "That's not fair," I scoffed. "Fair? You're standing here accusing me of something you know damn well isn't true, just because you don't like the fact that I stopped chasing you." Her nostrils flared. "You're different now. You act like you don't even care." I held her gaze, my voice calm, steady. "I don't." Silence. Her expression flickered. Shock, then anger, then something else. Something closer to fear. "What? Are you seeing that Emma girl from your office?" she blurted out. "I've seen how she looks at you." I laughed again, but this time it was cold. "You're unbelievable." "Just admit it," she snapped. "You checked out of this marriage a long time ago." I looked at her for a long moment, then finally said the words I had been holding back for months. "You're right," I said quietly. "I did." She froze. She had been expecting a fight, not the truth. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel anything. I just turned and walked past her, heading to the bedroom. I pulled out a suitcase and started packing. Behind me, she finally snapped out of her shock. "Wait," she said, stepping forward. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. She moved to block the doorway. "You're really leaving? Just like that?" I zipped up the suitcase and met her eyes, my expression unreadable. "You left first," I said simply. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I walked past her without looking back. The house felt smaller as I walked through it one last time. I grabbed my keys. She stood there, frozen, watching me. I waited, giving her a chance to say something real, something honest. She didn't. So I walked out. I didn't check my phone. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I just drove. The road stretched ahead of me, dark and quiet. The city lights fading in my rearview mirror. My hands were steady on the wheel, my breathing even. I had walked out, and for the first time, I hadn't felt the urge to turn around. But I knew her. I knew this wasn't over. She wasn't done, and neither was I. I spent the next few days away, avoiding her calls, ignoring her texts. She sent everything from demands to guilt trips, cycling through every tactic she had left. "You can't just leave like this. You're being ridiculous. You're going to regret this?" I didn't respond. I worked late, spent hours at the gym, crashed on Ethan's couch when I didn't feel like booking another hotel. And then I went back. Not to talk, not to fix anything, just to grab more clothes, a few personal things, to make it clear that I wasn't coming back. I wasn't expecting the house to be empty, but I also wasn't expecting what I walked into. Music, loud, pulsing bass that vibrated through the floor, laughter, shouting, glass clinking against countertops. I stepped inside, and for a moment, I didn't even recognize my own home. Beer bottles scattered on the kitchen island. A group of people I had never seen before lounging on the couch. Someone I didn't know opening my fridge like they lived there. And in the center of it all, Isolde, laughing, drinking, acting as if nothing had happened. Her eyes flicked toward me as I stepped inside. Instead of shock, regret, or even concern, she smirked, like she had been waiting for me. I pushed through the crowd, jaw tight. "What the hell is this?" She took another sip of her drink before answering, voice light and careless. "Oh, I forgot to tell you. We're having a little get-together." A little get-together. I looked around again. The music, the strangers, the mess. This wasn't a get-together. It was a statement. She wanted to make it clear that my absence didn't mean a damn thing to her, that she wasn't sitting at home waiting for me, that she was still in control. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. Unbelievable. She leaned against the counter, tilting her head. "What's the problem, Cass? You don't even live here anymore. Why do you care?" A few people nearby, quieted, watching us now. She smirked again, knowing exactly what she was doing. I clenched my fists at my sides, but not out of anger, out of realization. This wasn't about a party. It wasn't even about me. This was about proving something to herself, that she still had some kind of hold on me, that she could still get under my skin. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I turned around and walked out. She called after me, her voice dripping with mock amusement. "You're seriously mad? Cass, grow up." I didn't stop. For the first time, her words didn't affect me at all. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, feeling nothing but exhaustion. This was never about fixing the marriage. It was about keeping me trapped. But I wasn't trapped anymore. I took a slow breath, staring at the house in my rearview mirror. Then, without a second thought, I drove away. As I drove away, the house disappeared into the distance, swallowed by the night. The music, the laughter, the people who didn't belong there, none of it mattered anymore. I had wasted too much time caring about things that were never mine to hold on to. I was free, or at least I thought I was, until the whispers started. It began as something subtle, a strange look from a colleague, a polite smile from an acquaintance that didn't quite reach their eyes, people hesitating before responding when I greeted them. At first, I chalked it up to my own exhaustion. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe the stress of leaving was making me paranoid. Then Ethan called. "Dude," he said the moment I picked up. "What the hell is Isolde telling people?" I frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I was at a bar last night, and some people were talking. About you." He hesitated, then sighed. "Man, I think she's spinning the breakup in her favor." I leaned back in my chair, gripping my phone. "What did she say?" "I don't know exactly," he admitted. "But people are acting like you're the one who messed up." I clenched my jaw. I hadn't spoken to Isolde in days. I hadn't made any public statements, hadn't badmouthed her to anyone. I had simply walked away. But that was the difference between us. I walked away quietly. She needed an audience. That night, I checked social media, and there it was. A series of cryptic passive-aggressive posts, vague enough to avoid direct accusations, but clear enough for anyone who knew us to understand. It's crazy how people pretend to be the victim when they're the ones who abandoned you. Some men just can't handle a strong woman. Wasted years on someone who never really saw me, never again. I stared at the screen, my pulse steady, my emotions numb. I had expected backlash. I had expected some kind of retaliation. But this wasn't just bitterness. This was her rewriting the story. And then Ethan sent me a message. "You need to hear this." Attached was a voice memo, a recording. I hit play. The sound of a dinner party filled my ears. Clinking glasses, muffled laughter. And then her voice. Isolde, laughing. "Cassian?" God, he was so controlling. He used to dictate everything I did. A chorus of murmured agreement, someone muttering, "Ugh, I hate men like that." "I had to walk on eggshells around him," she continued. "Honestly, I'm relieved he's out of the house. Now I can actually breathe." Laughter, agreement, encouragement. I exhaled slowly, letting the words settle. She wasn't just twisting the truth. She was making sure people saw me as the villain. The next night, I showed up at a gathering I knew she would be at. I wasn't there to cause a scene. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to end this. The moment I walked in, I felt the shift. Conversations dipped into murmurs, eyes flicked toward me, some with curiosity, others with quiet judgment. And then I saw her. She was mid-laugh when she spotted me, her fingers wrapped around a glass of wine. For a brief second, I saw it, the hesitation, the moment of uncertainty. Then, she plastered on a bright smile. "Cassian," she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. What a surprise! I didn't smile back. I didn't acknowledge the act. I walked up to her, stopping just close enough that only she could hear me. "You really want to play this game?" I asked, my voice calm. Her smile faltered. She glanced at the people around us, as if calculating her next move. "Game?" she said sweetly. "I don't know what you're talking about." I tilted my head slightly. "Lying about me, making me out to be the bad guy, trying to turn people against me." Her lips parted slightly. "I never lied." I leaned in, my voice low but firm. "Say whatever you want," I murmured. "But you and I both know the truth." She swallowed. "And deep down," I added, "so do they." For the first time, she had no response. I let the silence settle before stepping back. I didn't wait for her to argue, to defend herself, to twist things even further. I just walked out. Without anger, without regret, just done. As I stepped outside, I let out a slow breath. The weight I had carried for years was finally lifting. I had nothing left to prove. As I stepped outside the gathering, the cold air felt sharper against my skin. But for the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of her lies. She could spin whatever narrative she wanted. I didn't care anymore. I walked to my car, got in, and drove off without looking back. I was done. But she wasn't. It started with a nagging feeling. I hadn't checked our shared bank account in weeks. Ever since I moved out, I had avoided looking at anything that still connected me to her. I had my own money, my own accounts. I didn't need to keep tabs on anything. But something told me to look. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was just one last thread that needed to be severed. I opened the banking app on my phone, scrolling through the transaction history, and then I saw it. Thousands of dollars, gone, multiple cash withdrawals, different locations, casinos. My stomach dropped. I went through every single transaction, checking dates, matching withdrawals with her social outings. It wasn't just a one-time thing. She had been doing this for weeks. She had been gambling with our money. My fingers tightened around my phone as I scrolled through the charges, disbelief turning into something heavier. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some careless overspending. This was betrayal. I exhaled sharply, my jaw clenching. I had given her space, let her do whatever she wanted after I walked away. But this was different. This wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. This was theft. I called her. She didn't answer at first. I called again. This time, she picked up. Her voice was light, careful. "Cassian." "Where's the money?" Silence. Then a scoff. "What are you talking about?" I didn't play games. I sent her a screenshot of the transactions. "Try again." More silence. Then finally she exhaled. "Jesus, Cassian, it's not a big deal." My fingers curled into a fist. "Not a big deal? You took thousands of dollars, Isolde." She let out a dry laugh. "I borrowed it. Relax, I'll put it back." I leaned against the counter, running a hand down my face. "You stole from me." Her tone sharpened. "It was our money." "No," I said coldly. "It was mine, and you knew that?" She tried to justify it. "It's not like you need the money." I was stressed. It was just something to take my mind off things. "Don't be dramatic." I listened, but I had already made up my mind. This wasn't just another argument. This was my last line. I hung up without another word. Then I called my lawyer. An official legal notice was sent to her the next morning, a demand for repayment, a financial separation. A clear message. She wasn't going to get away with this. She panicked. She called. She texted. She even showed up at my work. I refused to respond. For the first time, she was scared. I sat back in my chair, reading the lawyer's draft for the financial separation. I wasn't just leaving her emotionally. I was cutting her off completely. As I leaned back in my chair, staring at the legal document in front of me, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not anger, not regret, just the quiet certainty that this was the only path left. It was over. Or at least, it should have been. The divorce papers were filed within the week. I didn't waste time. I didn't hesitate. I walked into my lawyer's office, signed the documents, and left, knowing that I had finally put the last nail in the coffin. I didn't expect a thank you. I expected her rage, and she didn't disappoint. The calls started the next day. At first I ignored them, let them go to voicemail, let the texts pile up without response. Then, my lawyer forwarded me an email from hers. She wasn't just fighting the divorce, she was contesting it, and she wanted half of everything. I sat in stunned silence as I read through the list of demands. The house, a portion of my retirement funds, alimony, a claim that she had sacrificed her career for the marriage. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Sacrificed her career? She had spent the last few years prioritizing everything but me. She had treated me like an afterthought, dismissed my needs, ignored every effort I had made. And now, she wanted my money too? Ethan's voice echoed in my mind from weeks ago. She's panicking, man. She knows she pushed you too far. I hadn't been angry before. Not really. But this was war. The first court hearing came faster than I expected. I showed up with my lawyer, prepared for a battle. Isolde showed up playing the victim. She sat across from me, composed, her expression carefully crafted to look wounded but dignified. She told the court how I had abandoned her, how she had given up so much for our marriage, how she was merely asking for fairness. I sat there, listening, barely blinking, and then I let my lawyer speak. Bank statements, transaction records, receipts from the casinos. Every reckless withdrawal, every irresponsible expense, every sign that she had never cared about our life together, only about what she could take from it. Her case started crumbling. I saw it in the way she stiffened, the way she glanced at her lawyer, hoping for a lifeline that wasn't coming. She wasn't expecting me to fight back, but she should have. After court, she cornered me in the hallway. Her voice was low, sharp. "You're really going to do this?" I looked at her, unflinching. "You started this." She narrowed her eyes. "I'll drag this out for years if I have to." I let out a slow breath, then met her gaze with something colder than anger. "You can try," I said, voice steady. "But I promise you, I'll fight harder." For the first time, I saw it, the crack in her confidence. She wasn't in control anymore. I walked past her without another word. As I stepped outside the courthouse, I knew one thing. This war wasn't over, but I was ready for it. The first sign came at work. Colleagues who used to greet me with easy smiles now hesitated before speaking. Conversation stopped the moment I entered the break room. Some people barely made eye contact. I knew the feeling. Whispers, rumors. She had started again. Ethan was the one who finally said it out loud. He pulled me aside one afternoon, his expression grim. "Dude, people are talking." I exhaled sharply. "About what?" He hesitated before saying it. "Isolde's making you look like the villain." I scoffed, shaking my head. "What is she saying now?" "That you were controlling, manipulative, financially abusive." He folded his arms, watching my reaction. "She's playing the victim again." I let out a slow breath, my jaw tightening. Of course. She had tried to take my money, and when that failed, she moved on to the one thing she still had left. Perception. She wanted to destroy my reputation. I clenched my fists but forced myself to stay calm. "Let her." Ethan frowned. "Seriously? You're just gonna let her drag your name through the mud?" I met his gaze, my voice steady. "It's not about the truth for her. It's about the story she can sell." He sighed. "Just watch your back, man." I nodded. "I always do." Then came the public humiliation. I hadn't planned on going to the party. It was a mutual friend's birthday. Someone I liked but hadn't seen much since the divorce proceedings started. But Ethan insisted. "You need a break, man," he said. "Come have a drink. Be around people who actually like you." I should have known she'd be there, and I definitely should have known she'd take the opportunity to make a scene. I walked in just as I heard my name. Cassian always made me feel like I wasn't enough. My steps slowed. The room was quiet except for her voice. I turned my head, spotting her in the center of a gathered crowd, her eyes glassy as she put on the performance of her life. "He controlled my every move," she continued, shaking her head as if recalling some deep pain. He made me feel like I had to earn his love. I stood there, silent. Victoria smirked from the corner. Michael placed a comforting hand on Isolde's shoulder. "You're strong for leaving him." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the group, and then, finally, someone noticed me. The silence spread like wildfire. Heads turned. Expressions shifted from pity to something else. Isolde's eyes flickered to mine. For a split second, I saw it. Panic. She hadn't expected me to hear it myself. She had been hoping for secondhand whispers, people carrying the story to me so she wouldn't have to face me directly. But now, there I was, watching, listening, and yet, I still didn't react. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just let the weight of the silence settle over her. Her breathing quickened, and I saw her scrambling for control. "Cassian," she started, her voice suddenly softer, more careful. I turned and walked out. Not because I was angry, but because, for the first time, I truly didn't care. That night, I sat in my car, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The man looking back at me wasn't the same one who had begged for her love. He wasn't the same man who had tried to hold on to a marriage that had already died. He wasn't even the same man who had walked away. He was someone new, someone free. I exhaled slowly, a smirk tugging at the corner of my lips. She thought she could destroy me. She thought I would break, but she forgot. I wasn't the same man anymore. As I sat in my car staring at my reflection, I felt it, the shift. The war she started was no longer about our past. It wasn't about our marriage, our mistakes, or even the love that had once existed. It was about control, and for the first time, she was losing. But she wasn't done yet. The next blow came in the form of an envelope, a thick stack of legal documents delivered straight to my attorney's office. I had barely taken a sip of my morning coffee when the call came in. "You're going to want to sit down for this," my lawyer said. I didn't sit, I listened, and with every word, my grip on the phone tightened. Isolde had filed an official complaint against me. She was accusing me of neglecting her, painting herself as the abandoned wife, the victim of emotional cruelty. Her demands were outrageous: additional financial compensation, a claim that I was never home, that I left her alone, a carefully crafted narrative that made her look like a wounded woman who had been discarded. I barely heard the rest before Ethan stormed into my office, waving his phone. "Are you seeing this?" he nearly shouted. "She ignored you for years, and now she's saying you neglected her?" I exhaled slowly, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. "She's not trying to win, Ethan," I said. "She's trying to make me lose everything." The first hearing was scheduled for the following week. I arrived early, dressed in a charcoal suit, my lawyer at my side. I had prepared myself for the show she would put on, but even knowing didn't make it easier to stomach. Isolde arrived looking fragile, as if she had spent the past few months in mourning rather than orchestrating a full-blown war. Subtle makeup, a neutral-colored dress, her hair pulled back just enough to look soft, approachable. I almost laughed, and then her lawyer began to speak. "Your Honor, my client has suffered immeasurable distress due to her husband's emotional neglect." They painted a picture of a lonely wife, waiting at home, desperate for love and affection, while I spent nights working late, prioritizing my career over our marriage. I could hear murmurs in the courtroom. I could feel the eyes on me. I didn't react. I didn't have to. My lawyer stood and calmly dismantled every lie. He presented my work records, proof that the long hours were for us, to provide for the life she had so freely enjoyed. He presented text messages, conversations where I had tried, where I had reached out, planned dates, checked in, and Isolde's responses, dismissive, cold. The judge's expression shifted as the evidence was laid out, piece by piece. Her case was unraveling. During the recess, we found ourselves alone in the hallway. For the first time, she looked nervous. Her fingers clutched her phone like a lifeline, but her gaze flickered to mine, uncertain. I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. "You'll never win, Isolde." She swallowed hard. "You don't know that." I tilted my head slightly. "I do, because I'm not fighting for revenge. I'm fighting for my freedom." She flinched. I had never seen her flinch before, and yet, even now, she refused to back down. By the end of the day, my lawyer had made the final move, a counterclaim, seeking damages for defamation. Isolde paled as the words left his mouth. For the first time, She looked genuinely afraid. The tables had turned. As I stepped outside the courthouse, I felt it again. That weight lifting, piece by piece. This battle was almost over, but not yet. My counterclaim had changed everything. What was once a carefully controlled story, her story, was now a tangled mess of contradictions and exposed lies. And it was all unraveling in real time. My lawyer stood before the court, presenting the facts one by one. Isolde's gambling debts, withdrawals, bank statements, evidence of reckless spending, her fabricated accusations, messages proving she had ignored me, dismissed me, and only turned to legal action when she realized I was gone for good. Financial discrepancies, money taken without my consent, missing funds she could no longer explain away. The judge's expression grew increasingly unimpressed, and for the first time since this war began, I saw it in her face. Fear. Then she cracked. The courtroom was silent, the weight of the evidence pressing down on her. I watched as she shifted in her seat, her hands gripping the table. Her lawyer whispered something to her, probably telling her to keep calm, to let the process play out. But she couldn't. She snapped. "You don't understand," she blurted, her voice cutting through the courtroom. "He was supposed to love me." A murmur rippled through the room. Her lawyer turned, eyes wide. "Isolde! He left me!" she yelled, her voice raw, desperate. "He gave up." He stopped trying. Nobody spoke. She turned her gaze on me, her breathing unsteady. "You think you're the victim, Cassian? You think you're innocent?" I didn't move. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You're not. You just walked away like I was nothing. Like I didn't matter." I exhaled slowly, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with finality. Because this wasn't a confession. This wasn't an apology. It was the last attempt of a woman who had lost control of everything. The judge cleared his throat, his voice firm. "Ms. Vance, please refrain from outbursts in this courtroom." Her lawyer whispered furiously, but it was too late. She had shown them exactly who she was. After the hearing, she was waiting for me outside. For the first time, she looked lost. Not angry, not manipulative, just lost. I walked past her, but she reached for my arm. "You're really just going to walk away?" she asked, her voice quieter now. I met her eyes, my voice steady. "I already did." She swallowed, but she didn't argue, because she knew it was true. I pulled my arm away and kept walking. For the first time, I didn't look back. The ruling came in. The court sided with me. No alimony, no claim to my assets, nothing. She was left with only the consequences of her actions. I walked out of the courtroom, inhaling deeply. The air felt lighter. For the first time in years, the future belonged to me. A week passed. I hadn't heard from her. No texts, no calls, no desperate attempts to spin the story. And yet, I wasn't naive enough to believe it was over. So, when the knock came at my door late one evening, I already knew who it was. I hesitated for only a second before opening it. There she stood, Isolde. But this wasn't the woman I had spent months fighting in court. She wasn't seething, wasn't armed with accusations, wasn't smirking like she always had an upper hand. She just looked lost. Her makeup was lighter, her clothes more casual, her expression uncertain. I didn't say anything. I waited. Finally, she let out a breath. "Can we talk?" I didn't move. "About what?" "Just us," she said, almost pleading. "No fighting, no courtrooms, just us." I let the silence stretch, watching her shift on her feet. She looked at me like she was searching for something, some flicker of the man who had once adored her, who would have done anything to keep her, who had once believed they were forever. But that man didn't exist anymore. She stepped inside without waiting for permission, standing awkwardly in the middle of my living room. "I know I messed up," she started, voice quieter than usual. She shook her head. "I wasn't fair to you. I pushed you away, and I took things for granted, but..." She looked up at me. "That doesn't mean we weren't real." I exhaled, crossing my arms. "Isolde, can't we just talk?" she cut in. "Just us?" I studied her for a long moment. Her eyes were softer now, no longer full of the fire she had weaponized against me. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel bitterness. I just felt done. I shook my head slowly. We already did all the talking we needed to. She swallowed hard. We had something special once. Doesn't that mean anything? I let her words settle. Then I answered, my voice calm, certain. I did love you, I admitted. And that's exactly why I have to let you go. She blinked like she hadn't expected that. Like she had prepared for anger, for resentment, for something she could argue against. But she wasn't prepared for peace. She tried one last time. She stepped forward, reaching for me, as if she could physically pull me back into the past. But I took a step back, her face crumpled. Cassian! I met her eyes one last time, not with hatred, not with regret, just finality. I didn't owe her anything anymore. She started crying. But I didn't stay to watch. I simply walked to the door and held it open. She hesitated. Then finally, she stepped through. I closed the door behind her. The silence felt different now. Not empty, not cold, just peaceful. I poured myself a drink, staring out the window, realizing something important. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something better. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel bitter. I felt free. My phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced down at the screen. An old friend. I picked it up, exhaling deeply before answering. It was time to start living again. The past had a way of sneaking up when you least expected it. It had been weeks since I closed the door on Isolde, weeks of rediscovering who I was outside of her shadow. Life had settled into something simple. Work, the gym, casual dinners with Ethan, and the kind of quiet I had once feared but now embraced. And then, one morning, it happened. I ran into her. I had stopped by a coffee shop, the kind of place I wouldn't have set foot in when I was married, because she had always found something wrong with it. Too loud, too small, not her kind of aesthetic. But it was my kind of place. And as I waited for my order, I glanced up. She was there, Isolde. She hadn't seen me yet. She stood near the counter, arms crossed, scrolling through her phone, looking different, thinner, tired. Like the war had drained something from her. She glanced up at the same moment I did, and for a brief second, our eyes met. I braced myself for something. A lingering ache, a flicker of old anger, some reaction that proved I still cared. But I felt nothing. Not hate, not longing, just nothing. She hesitated, like she was considering whether to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned, grabbed my coffee, and walked out. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, the realization hit me. I was free, not just from the marriage, from her, from the need to prove anything, from the years of trying too hard, from the bitterness of how it all ended. I had already found closure. I had found it the day I stopped looking for it in her. That evening, I met Ethan for dinner. It felt normal, effortless. We talked about work, travel plans, things that had nothing to do with the past. For the first time in a long time, I laughed, really laughed, without feeling like I was forcing it. At one point, Ethan smirked, nudging his beer toward me. You know, Claire's been asking about you. I raised a brow. Claire? You remember her? He said. The one from the office. She thinks you're interesting. I chuckled, shaking my head. I'm sure she does. Ethan grinned. So, you gonna ask her out? I took a sip of my drink, considering. Not because I wasn't interested, but because, for the first time, I wasn't in a rush. I had spent years chasing something that wasn't real. Now, I was content just letting life happen. When I got home that night, I stepped onto my balcony, letting the cool night air wash over me. This space was mine. No ghosts of old fights, no reminders of what had been lost. Just me. I poured myself a drink and leaned back, staring up at the night sky. No anger, no pain, just peace. I took a deep breath and let it all go. The past was over, and for the first time in years, the future felt limitless. Life doesn't always give us the closure we think we need. Sometimes it's not about getting the last word or proving someone wrong. It's about walking away with your dignity intact, choosing yourself, even when it hurts. I spent years fighting for something that wasn't meant for me, but in losing her, I found myself. And maybe that's the real lesson. Love should never be something you have to beg for. If you've ever felt like you were the only one trying, maybe it's time to stop. Maybe it's time to choose you. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.